Yep.
Okay, so I was wondering what topic to actually do today, and just figuring we're just studying a lot, I thought we'd talk about a certain form of entertainment. So I chose anime. But before I start talking about anime, there is a couple of things I'd like to clarify, because a lot of my friends make a very simple mistake regarding anime. So, two things. First off, these are not animes.
What's the one on the bottom left?
These are all animated cartoons.
Oh, what's the one on the bottom left?
Teen Titans.
Oh, that one.
And secondly, most importantly, this is not an anime. This is actually an American cartoon that was adapted with a storyline and animation that followed anime styles. Just so we're clear on that. So,
That's like Anya.
what is an anime? Well, animes are any Japanese movies or TV shows that has been animated in Japan and produced in Japan and originally voiced in Japanese. And the TV shows, their episodes tend to be about somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes long, and each season lasts somewhere between 13 to 25 episodes, sometimes up to 50, and sometimes it could even go into the hundreds, but that's actually very rare. So when you're watching anime, the choice is inevitable that you're going to have to choose between two options, and that is, do you want to watch it English sub or English dub? And it's really the viewer's preference. There's really no faults in either of them, but I would personally recommend you watch it in subbing, because although the English does sound a little more comfortable to people who aren't familiar with Japanese, I feel like a lot of the times the English dubbing, when they're trying to act out an emotional scene or something, the translation's not very accurate a lot of times, and also, it just feels awkward. Like, something about the voice acting, it just doesn't match up to the scene. And if you do like a compare and contrast between two scenes, you'll know exactly what I mean. So, if you ever try watching, watch it sub. It sounds actually a lot better. Also, when you're watching anime, there are several categories of anime. In fact, the genre of anime is very broad, like TV shows. There's action, comedy, drama, slice of life, everything. But the best way to divide an anime into certain categories is based off their artwork, because based on their artwork, it tends to appeal to a certain kind of audience. And there are four main artworks that seems to draw the audience. The first is called the kodomo animes. And kodomo in Japanese means children, so it's meant to target audiences from ages 4 to 8. And as you can see, a lot of them, they tend to be very cartoon-like, very colorful, and usually the main protagonist's ages are within the ages of 4 to 8. The second category is probably one that you guys are all very familiar with, probably seen it on TV. It's called the shonen animes. And shonen in Japanese means teenage males. So what differentiates this from the kodomo animes is that their animation style tends to be a lot more realistic. The main protagonist in these shows tends to be a male who's aged somewhere between 12 to 18 years old. And they like to make their characters look very masculine and cool looking. And also what separates the shonen from all the other genres is that they tend to be very favorable for making very action-based, explosive scenes, and where the character just like power up and seem like God. That is not the only part of shonen. Shonen has comedies, romances, and so forth, but what really defines them is the explosive action scenes. The third genre that is in animes, or the category, is the shoujo animes. And shoujo in Japanese means teenage girls. So like the shonen, which attracts the male audience, a shoujo attracts the female audience. And in these, they're like the shonen, they're very realistic styles, but the trick with them is they tend to make their characters look a lot more petite. The main character is usually female, whose age is somewhere between 12 to 18 years old. And they try to make them look very pretty and petite, and usually they're like the most popular girl in class. Also, the way they show the male characters tends to be very different. Instead of making them look masculine and cool, they make them look very handsome or pretty or something that'll draw the girls to them. And another thing that separates the shoujo from the shonen is, unlike the shonen, which focuses more on the action parts, shoujo tends to focus more on slice of life, romantic comedy, and drama and so forth, while the shonen likes the action pace. And the final category is the adult animes. And the adults, what differentiates from the adult animes to the shoujo and shonen, they are also realistic, but instead of making their characters naturally look cool or very pretty, they tend to make the characters look a lot more realistic. And also, they tend to tackle on very mature themes like slavery, poverty, warfare, and stuff like that. Normally, that's not very common in shoujo and shonen. And also, when it comes to their action scenes, they are not that explosive. Well, they can be that explosive, but they tend to be a lot more realistic and a lot more gruesome and gritty. And when you're watching anime, you'll see a lot of various traits that are seen in all four categories. Like, I'm pretty sure some of you've seen it. Most obvious is the distinctive eyes that the anime characters have. They tend to be very big and expressive. Sometimes they get embarrassed, you see that sweat drop coming down, or when they get angry, you see that cross-shaped vein. But I want to focus on two that I find are the most important, because sometimes people who first watch anime tend to get a little overwhelmed, like, what is this? And that is, the first one I like to tackle is something I like to call English. And what essentially English is when a Japanese voice actor tries to speak English in a scene. And because a lot of them are not fluent in English, they either sound somewhat passable in speaking English or they completely butcher the language. And I got a small sample here for you guys to see. It's a small scene. And that's just one example.
Wait, can you play it again?
Oh, sure. Did you not hear it?
No, I didn't really hear it.
And like I said, that is just one example. There's plenty more. If you keep watching it, you'll see it a lot. Unfortunately, this is only in subbing versions, not the dubbing, because dubbing, they speak perfect English. So it's one of the pleasures if you're actually watching it sub. And the second common trait I like to talk about that tends to confuse a lot of people is the nosebleeds. And these tend to, you'll see this a lot in animes where the character is seeing a busty woman, he's trying to peek at girls in the bathhouse, or he's just having some sort of perverted thought, and he'll just, for some random reason, just suffer a nosebleed. And that nosebleed can be just a small trickle to something like Niagara Falls. And I was wondering why that was happening when I first watched anime, so I did some looking up, and it seems like it was actually based off an old Japanese wives' tale that pretty much stated that if a person suffers a nosebleed, they are sexually aroused. So just know, if they suffer a nosebleed, they're being sexually aroused in the scene. So, how can you watch anime? There are several ways. My preferred method, get on the plane to Tokyo, get in a hotel, turn on the TV, but that's not very feasible for most of you. You can always torrent them, and then there's even websites that lets you watch anime. And my preferred one to watch online is called crunchyroll.com. They have a very wide selection. You can usually watch it subbed or dubbed on it. Netflix has a small collection of anime you can also watch on there. And if all else fails, you can just simply Google it. Just like, for example, just type in Naruto episode 2, and usually the first 5 top results will give you what you're looking for. There's even a website that lets you keep track of what animes you're watching. It's called myanimelist.net. For free, you can create your own account, and then it helps you keep track of what animes you're watching, how many episodes you've watched, what other people thought of the animes. And if you like a certain one, then what it can do is it'll actually give you a bunch of recommendations. So if you like this one, these are also just as good. And this is all good and all, but I'm pretty sure a lot of you don't even know where to start with anime, and I don't blame you. It's a big world. So I've actually came up with a couple of shows that you can try watching. I'll give you a basic premise of it and what I personally think of it. So the first one I'd like to recommend to you is a classic one. You've probably seen it on Cartoon Network or Adult Swim and Toonami, and it's called Cowboy Bebop. This one is considered a classic, and I would highly recommend this one because out of all the animes I've seen, this one is the least anime-like. In fact, when I first saw it, I didn't even know it was an anime. I thought it was a show, just an American TV show. And also, it's one of the few animes I've seen where the dubbing is actually superior to the subbing. So I actually prefer to watch this one in English because it sounds so much better. And it's a science fiction, and it's about a crew of bounty hunters in space on board a ship called the Bebop, and the characters are composed of Jet, a former detective, Spike, a former crime syndicate enforcer, Faye, a debt-ridden gambler, Ein, a genetically modified Welsh Corgi, and Ed, a 12-year-old eccentric genius hacker. The next one I'd like to recommend is called Death Parade. This one is a psychological thriller, so unfortunately I can't give too much of it away without ruining the plot, but I'll just give you the basic premise of what happens. So, two elevator doors open up simultaneously. A man and a woman walk out at the same time, and it turns out they're husband and wife, but they have no idea how they got there. And then they follow a long corridor in front of them, and they end up in a bar, and then they meet a bartender named Deccan, and he explains 5 things. First, he cannot explain where they are. Second, he's going to have them play a game. On that game, they will stake their lives, and the game will be determined by roulette. And until the game is over, they will not be allowed to leave the bar. I wish I could say more, but I would spoil a lot of things. So if you watch it, you'll just be, whoa, you'll be blown away because you will not see what's coming on there. The next one I would like to recommend is called Anohana, the flower we saw that day. And this is for all you drama queens out there who just love crying. Because I am not much of a drama queen, but I have to admit when I see a good drama, and this one is it. I'm not that emotional, and this one got me crying buckets at the end of it. So emotional. And it's about a group of 5 friends. When they're children, they used to be so close, and then a certain incident occurs that causes them to drift apart, and then 10 years later, another incident happens, and it forces them to get back together to reconcile what happened in the past. The next one I like to recommend is for all you vampire lovers out there. If any one of you guys love vampires, this is probably the best anime to try watching. It's called Blood Plus. And it's about a young teenage girl named Saya who's been living with her newly adopted family for a year. She can't remember anything that happened prior to that year. And one day at night, she gets attacked by this giant bat-like creature that can't be killed. And while she's running away from this creature, she meets a man named Haji, and she finds out that her blood, for some reason, can kill the creatures. So she joins an organization called Red Shield to find out why her blood can kill them and find out more about what happened to her in the past. The next one I'd like to recommend to you is called Parasite, the Maxim. And this one is a sci-fi, and it takes place in modern-day Japan, where one night hundreds of these little spores come raining down from the sky. And from these spores, these little worm-like creatures come out, and they seek a human. They enter their brain through their ear, and then they consume their brain and take over their bodies. And the story revolves around a high school boy who ends up with a parasite not in his head, but in his arm, and consumes his arm, and it becomes a sentient, talking parasitic life form on his arm. And the story is essentially about the parasites that did successfully hijack their host bodies are trying to kill these two because they see them as a threat. And the final one I'd recommend, and I would recommend this to anyone, even if you don't like anime, because the story is just so compelling, and it's called Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. And I love this because it has great story, the music, the character development, the fight scenes, everything I think is just spot on perfect. And it's a story about 2 brothers who try to resurrect their recently deceased mother by using alchemy, but it doesn't work. And the main character, Ed, ends up losing his right leg in the process, and his younger brother, Alphonse, ends up losing his entire body. And Ed, using alchemy, sacrifices his right arm to bind his brother's soul to a suit of armor. And what this entire story basically is about is these 2 brothers going on a journey to find a way to restore their bodies back to normal. Like I said, this is just a very basic premise of all these shows, but hopefully it opens you up to some anime, and hopefully you'll enjoy some anime like I have. Thank you very much.